Woman much missed, how you call to me,
saying that now you are not as you were when you had changed from the one who was all to me, but as at first when our day was fair. Can it be you that I hear? Let me view you then, standing as when I drew near to the town, where you would wait for me. Yes, as I knew you then, even to the original air-blue gown. Or is it only the breeze, in its listlessness, travelling across the wet mead to me here, you being ever dissolved to one wistlessness, heard no more again, far or near? Thus I, faltering forward, leaves around me falling, wind oozing thin through the thorn from Norwood, and the woman calling.
Woman much missed. That haunting first line refers to Hardy's first wife, Emma, who has just died when he writes this poem in December 1912, one of about 20 that he writes in an outpouring of grief at that time.
These poems are some of his best, and we can feel the emotion surging from the lines.
But you know, this isn't just about bereavement, it's also about his feelings about the madness that we've heard about in some of the earlier poems. And that has just become an all-consuming thing.
There's grief in this poem, but I can also sense a great deal of relief. And so often when somebody has a physical or mental illness and then they pass, there is relief for those they leave behind.
Mark, this is such a moving poem. How is Hardy getting that emotion across?
Well, obviously here we're in the 1912 to 13 love poetry about the death of Emma and him really remembering his first wife. The poem starts off with, "Woman much missed, how you call to me, call to me." So repetition is being used, but in terms of really mirroring, I think, the wind. Saying that now you are not as you were when you had changed from the one who was all to me, but as at first when our day was fair. This poem is really grief-stricken, and I think there's a great deal of remorse in it as well. It's one of the most famous Hardy poems, actually, of the period. But then he uses the questioning voice in stanza 2. Can it be you that I hear? Let me view you then, standing as when I drew near to the town where you would wait for me, yes, as I knew you then. And of course here he's talking about Lioness, he's talking about Cornwall Boscastle, even to the original air blue gown. And of course that's how he remembers Emma in this most beautiful blue gown, which is now in the Dorset Museum.
And there's a real feeling here of all the senses. There's that vision of the blue gown, there's the voice, but there's also taste, touch, smell.
Yes, very much. And if you look at stanza 3, we've got, or is it only the breeze in its listlessness, travelling across the wet mead to me here, you being ever dissolved to one wistlessness, heard no more again far or near. We've got the wind, we've got nature being used, but we've also got this final stanza, which I think where the mood changes and we almost come back to reality. So Hardy was very much remembering Emma, there's a nostalgia there, but now we come back to the present, which is thus I, so it's going back to Hardy himself, Emma's just died, grief-stricken, faltering forward. And that alliterative sound there, faltering forward, as though he's got to move forward with his grief. That's the way I read it. Leaves around me falling, wind oozing thin through the thorn from Norwood, and the woman calling. And there's a real silence around that final stanza. And Hardy's using all those techniques, leaves falling, wind oozing, which is a very sensual word to use as well, and the woman calling him.
The voice, I mean, it's one of perhaps the most famous of the Hardy poems overall, actually. Is that right? Has it got really that depth to value that?
I think it does. This is my personal favourite of the poems of 1912 to 1913, the elegies that Hardy wrote to Emma after her death. I suspect it was one of the earliest. It's dated in December 1912. In my novel, The Chosen, I imagine that it's the poem that he sits down to write when he has begun to come to terms with the fact of her absence, and it's one of the ways in which he begins to process that properly. The voice is Emma's voice. It's the voice of a ghost. It's the voice of the wife that Hardy has just lost. And he invokes her at the beginning. It begins with an invocation. Woman much missed, how you call to me, call to me. So in a sense, she's invoking him, if you like. He's invoking her for the purposes of the poem, which he's beginning to write. But he's doing this in response to her apparent summoning of him, saying that now you are not as you were when you had changed from the one who was all to me. So once again, as so often in these poems, we have a harking back to the Emma of his youth, the Emma he once courted in 1870, the Emma of the earliest days of their love affair, juxtaposed with the woman whom he came to resent, came to ignore, believed he no longer loved. And all of that is set up in the very first verse. And once again, if you look stylistically at how this is done, it's tremendously skilled. It's all done through these incantatory rhythms. They're very urgent, they're very expressive. So once again, we know that Emma wore this particular blue dress the second time he came to visit her in Cornwall in August 1870. She was waiting for him at Launceston railway station, so 40 years earlier, 40 years previously. And he remembers this. And again, the suggestion of the air blueness of the gown, she is no longer something physical. It's almost as if she's become part of something supernatural at this stage after death. But yet that air blue in this particular line reminds us of her physicality when she was still alive as a young woman. So there's this tremendous sense in this poem of him acknowledging her importance to him at the beginning of his life as a writer, in those days when she used to meet him in that air blue gown and welcome him and celebrate him as a human being, as a man, as a potential poet and a novelist. The distance between then and now, the fact that she's dead.
Well, what a moving poem. And we'll be hearing more of those 1912 to 13 poems in the next few videos. But now, let's listen to the voice again.
Woman much missed, how you call to me, saying that now you are not as you were when you had changed from the one who was all to me, but as at first when our day was fair. Can it be you that I hear? Let me view you then, standing as when I drew near to the town where you would wait for me. Yes, as I knew you then, even to the original air blue gown. Or is it only the breeze, in its listlessness, travelling across the wet mead to me here, you being ever dissolved to one wistlessness, heard no more again, far or near? Thus I, faltering forward, leaves around me falling, wind oozing thin through the thorn from norward, and the woman calling.